Up until recently, I didn't have too much exposure to the Devil May Cry franchise. However, I had gotten the first 4 games as part of my PlayStation Plus subscription, and I decided to get through them all to see if the upcoming 5th game would be to my liking. Despite a bit of a rocky road, especially with the abysmal 2nd game, I soon found myself a huge fan of the franchise, and Devil May Cry 3 in particular is one of the greatest games I've ever played. I was so excited for more that I picked up the latest entry the day it came out, and while it was far from perfect, I was still thoroughly satisfied. Taking place in the latest spot in the timeline, yes, even after Devil May Cry 2, which is now canonically between 1 and 4, go figure, Dante is hired by the mysterious V to take down a new powerful demon.
A powerful demon is about to resurrect, and we need your help, Dante.
Now that's a familiar tune. Do you have any idea how many times I've heard that exact same line?
Turns out this demon, Urizen, is no laughing matter. He rips off and steals away with Nero's Devilbringer arm, and with the power of the Yamato turns into a force more powerful than even the combined efforts of Dante, Nero, Trish, and Lady could deal with, even going so far as to destroy the Rebellion Sword. Suffice it to say, things aren't looking good.
This can't be happening. Dante lost.
With the help of the gunsmith Nico and her robotic prosthetic arms, Nero teams up with V to take out demons across the city and have another shot at defeating Urizen, rescuing their missing friends and saving the day along the way. The story is kind of an interesting point for all the Devil May Cry games. While it isn't the focus, it certainly shouldn't be what you're here for, it is enjoyable. The action is extremely stupid and way over the top, and that's a compliment. The dialogue is wonderfully hilarious and usually very underplayed, which marks a stark contrast to the setting.
Perfect timing. Now we're starting to act like a team.
Ew. You like flirting with me? Knock it off. Get in the car.
My only real slight complaint in this regard is whenever the story takes itself seriously. It doesn't come across nearly as well as the fun moments, but the characters are still so cool that it's always enjoyable to watch them interact with each other.
Bastard called me deadweight, but he come all this way for nothing. Stop hitting yourself and think of ways to get stronger and actually help. If Dante loses, you're all that can defeat Urizen.
For the visuals, the production team has gone a step beyond what I would expect, and this just might be the strongest use of Capcom's new RE engine yet. Resident Evil 7 looked great, the Resident Evil 2 remake looked awesome, but DMC5's cutscenes are stellar. Characters are so expressive, and it's complemented by the decent acting. At least compared to frickin' Norman Reedus, who's emotionless for the entire game. I'm gonna keep taking pot shots at Death Stranding whenever I can because this game's terrible and it was supposed to be story-driven. Environments are great too, from city streets to hotel buildings, swinging across rooftops, and of course, demonic worlds. I will say that the variety isn't as strong this time around. DMC4's Township to Snowy Castle to Lush Forest always gave you something new to look at. They managed to do a great job on mixing things up. DMC5 is a little weaker in this area, with the backdrop consisting mostly of modern-day city ruins. And even when you enter the hellish environments, you still get a bit of downtown in there, but it's still far from bad. And then there's the music. It's a little bit of a hit and miss. Dante's theme, Subhuman, is pretty weak in my opinion. While it does stand in line with the hard rock soundtrack of DMC3, which was fantastic, it's not really doing it for me here. V's theme, Crimson Cloud, is much better, but it's Nero's theme, the famous Devil Trigger, that absolutely steals the show.
Let's see, which one wants to play?
The music works dynamically depending on your performance in battle, getting more intense and skipping to later parts of a song if you can jump straight to an S rank quickly.
Guess who's getting their ass kicked?
It's such a small detail, but one that makes a big difference and motivates the player to get a high rank in every battle. Thankfully, you can switch out a character's theme for a different song, so I don't actually have to listen to Dante's Subhuman theme. I'll just put Devil Trigger in there as well. The boss's music are okay, nothing really special there, aside from the finale, which is extremely well done. Presentation-wise, gold stars all around. But let's talk about what really matters. If you've played DMC 3 or 4, then this will be familiar territory. The gameplay consists of a very simple button layout. The 4 face buttons act as melee attacks, ranged attacks, special attacks, and jumping. While most action games tend to have both light and heavy attacks, and switching between them for combos, the Devil May Cry games instead use a pause system. For example, attacking once, then pausing, before continuing will lead to one possible combo, while attacking twice and then pausing before attacking again will result in a different combo. It's very easy to grasp, however each combo is best for different situations, and it's up to the player to know which ones at any given time. The R1 button is used for locking onto an enemy, although this isn't quite used as one would expect. Sword swings are wide enough to make it easy to land hits, while ranged attacks will make sure to go for a target automatically. What locking on is really meant for are the directional attacks, such as pulling back and attacking to launch an enemy skyward, or jumping to the side for evasive maneuvers. It's also important to vary the attacks used as often as possible, as reusing the same moves will cause your rating to suffer. This isn't too big of a deal to worry about though, because using all the combos available one after another should become second nature with time. It's all surprisingly intuitive and very easy to get a grasp on. Instead of memorizing strings of button presses, it tends to come down to pauses and directional inputs. However, the potential depth can be astounding, and deciding what needs to be done on the fly is a little bit harder than it sounds. By the same token, however, this leads to one of my biggest complaints on this game. It's impossible to tell which target will be locked onto at a moment's notice. Here's a clear example. When this Death Scissor enemy begins to glow red, it can be killed in one shot. So I decide to lock on in order to ensure that it ends up being my target. However, I end up getting a completely different enemy from across the room. This is an issue that permeates the entire series. If I want to perform a sideways dodge, I'll need to lock on well ahead of time if I'm dealing with multiple enemies. If I try to be cool and do it at the last second, I'll likely end up facing the wrong direction. What I don't get is why isn't there an option to consistently lock on to the nearest enemy? Either one in the player's vicinity or at least in the general direction that the player is looking in. Again, it's been a problem in all of the Devil May Cry games, and I think this latest one probably has it the worst. The game is still perfectly enjoyable, and once you get used to it, you can kind of work around it. But this is an issue I've never been able to completely forgive. Each character has their own variation on the basic gameplay, with Nero and Dante essentially reprising their roles from DMC4. Nero's character is simpler for beginners to get a handle on, with a new ability that lies in his prosthetic arms. Pressing the circle button will now unleash an attack depending on the arm he has. Unfortunately, Nero's arms can only be switched out by destroying them, which doesn't quite feel right. It devalues the arms despite them being a big part of Nero's playstyle. The game also lays out a bunch of arms throughout each level, so there isn't much of a need to buy arms for yourself, unless you grow attached to a particular few. It's not a terrible system to have Nero's arms get destroyed so easily in combat, but I do wish that they could be freely swapped out and give the player more creative options to work with. Dante is better than ever this time around. His style switching is back from DMC4 and it works much in the same way, using the D-pad to select a particular style and the circle button executes it, often changing along with the current weapon equipped. Along with the styles, Dante also gets 4 melee weapons and 4 ranged weapons to swap in and out freely mid-combat, each with their own combos. His playstyle is extremely overwhelming at first, especially with something like the Balrog gloves, which has both punching and kicking combos that need to be switched in and out on their own as well. But with time, Dante can provide an amazing and rewarding experience.
I'm bored.
V is the odd one out and breaks the general rules of the game. Instead of attacking enemies directly, he instead commands two monsters of his own, references to DMC1, Shadow and a miniature version of Griffin, with both monsters reprising their attacks from the original game. Melee attacks command Shadow while ranged attacks use Griffin, and activating V's Devil Trigger will summon Nightmare. V's pets can't actually kill enemies, and it's up to V himself to finish them off with a single press of the circle button. His dodge abilities instantly summon his pets to his side, which is great for getting them out of trouble. Should a pet fall in battle, it will be out of commission for some time, and V is extremely vulnerable on his own. It's such a unique and interesting playstyle, but it doesn't quite feel all that fleshed out here. Each pet does have a wide variety of attacks and combos which are unlocked as the game progresses, similar to Dante and Nero, but it doesn't feel nearly as expansive or as deep. It's almost as if V was supposed to have his own game, which is not an idea that I'm against at all, but instead he got shoehorned into this one. While he has the fewest missions by far, his playstyle is also the most boring, and such a major departure from the already established formula. I don't necessarily want to say that I want V out of the game because his playstyle is really neat and creative, but I can't help but have this nagging feeling that his absence entirely might actually improve the game. I can play as Nero and Dante all day without any sort of problems, but if I have the option to skip V's missions, then I most certainly will. Maybe if V could have a variety of pets, similar to Dante's different weapons, then it might go a long way to mixing things up. But the way it comes off is that V's playstyle never really evolves for the whole game, and it gets dull after a while. The monster roll call is fantastic, although a few annoyances do stand out. Empusa Queen and Behemoth are awesome, powerful opponents that require hard-hitting combos and dodging their wide-sweeping attacks. And the Angelo enemies play a more focused, dueling fashion. Chaos might be my favorite enemy, with a long charging spin that can be slowed down with gunfire or blocked by Dante with proper timing. Fury is one that's a real pain for me. Its entire gimmick revolves around teleporting and then suddenly attacking, while being invulnerable most of the time. There are ways to cheese it, most notably with Dante's abilities, but I don't like fighting such gimmicky enemies. In comparison to the returning Death Scissors from DMC1, these guys have their own little gimmick, but there's nothing stopping you from just wailing on them either. Judecca, on the other hand, isn't so much a gimmick as it is just straight up obnoxious. These guys have a pretty large health pool, but once a combo gets started on them, they attempt to teleport right away. Couple this with their powerful long-ranged attacks, and you have an enemy you would like to get rid of quickly, but just can't. Despite my complaints, such as my difficulties with locking on and the more annoying enemies, DMC5 is still a fantastic game to play. It doesn't have as much variety in the environments as the previous games, and playing as V kind of sucks. But when you get down to it, it's an absolute joy to pull off extensive combos, and it controls better than ever. Although there is the really annoying issue with locking on using the R1 button, but it's not necessarily something you can't work around either. It's also the easiest Devil May Cry game by far. However, the later unlockable difficulties will ramp up the pain and frustration, so veterans shouldn't be too discouraged at how easy it is, and it should also act as a great opening for new players. With the previously mentioned issues out of the way, this could have easily been a near-perfect game with no glaring flaws. However, they are present and they do get in the way enough to be roadblocks. Even so, these last 3 Devil May Cry games have been a masterclass of action. So few games allow so much freedom and control in a 3D environment, against such a wide variety of enemies. This is pure fun in its most distilled form. Thanks for watching my review on Devil May Cry 5.
Sorry, but I can read all your moves. Jokes that I know you lose.